Hey guys, Zom Fox here, and today it is time to update the UFL playoff games tier list. That's right, yearly tradition where we add all the playoff games for the past UFL slash USFL slash XFL postseason and add them to the tier list of ultramodern spring football playoff games. Now the tier list, of course, is S to F, S, A, B, C, D, and F. C are for average game, F for really bad, A and S obviously great games. So you can look at the tier list of what we've had before. Of course, sadly, for the most part, most playoff games have been on the lower spectrum, right? We've seen a lot of D and F tier type of games. You've only seen a couple of really great ones. They were really great. But how did this year go? Well, the first game is going to be the USFL Conference Championship game between the Panthers and the Stallions. Now, this game was a wild one, ended 44-29, though the final score is a bit more lopsided as Michigan did get a very late touchdown. Birmingham was able to make this a one-score game multiple times during it. Now, this is a great game. Overall, it was a lot of Michigan doing what they tried to do last year, but the whole game. For those of you who remember the USFL Conference Championship game last year, essentially Michigan did exactly what they did in this one. They dominated, were keeping it in their hands, making it a game that they should easily win up until the end of the first half, where they then made a key mistake. Birmingham scored, they got momentum, and they cruised away with victory. This time, it was the same start, but Michigan kept going. And in the end, they won. They outscored Birmingham in almost every quarter, right? They tied in the second quarter. The fourth quarter, they only lost by 2. And then the other 2 quarters, right, they combined to win by a wide margin of 17 total points. And they ended up winning. Now, when you look at this game in terms of a statistical standpoint, Bryce Perkins had a great game. He had like an 80 completion percentage with a over 115 passer rating. Whereas the Stallions, they played 2 quarterbacks, both Jamar and Corral. Neither one of them actually looked all that good. Both of them threw an interception, and overall they weren't actually accurate in this game. This is pretty much a Deon Cain showcase for the Stallions. Deon Cain had an incredible game. In terms of his overall stats, was like 6 receptions for 124 yards. Now, the Panthers had great receivers as well. Both Hicatini and Turner had great games in this one. But overall, again, it was simple things. The turnover differential. Michigan was better in this game. Quarterback play, Michigan was better in this game. The ground game, this was something I mentioned heading into this game. Having Matt Colburn back as that receiving threat and running threat, with Toa Taua, Michigan dominated on the ground compared to Birmingham. They won it overall. As for the game itself, it was a really fun game to watch and was a really great playoff game. It was easily the best in the UFL era, as obviously last year's games were not exactly that good. This one was a really solid one. It goes to the A tier. It's not an S tier game. The fact is, it just does not compare to the 2022 championship game for the USFL or the North Division championship for the USFL in 23. But it was a really great game. Now, it was a great game somewhat opposite of the Stars Generals game. That was a great game because it was this close game where every play really mattered. This one was kind of one where it was just great in a sense it was a high-scoring, close game. So even though they're 2 very different games, I think this is definitely deserving of the same tier, that one. So it gets the A tier. The second game was the XFL championship game between the DC Defenders and the St. Louis Battlehawks. And let's just say this one was not a great game. Final score was 36-18, so yes, St. Louis literally scored half of what DC did. And that included a pure garbage time touchdown that Duggan scored. Speaking of Duggan, he's the biggest reason why this game is not going very high in the tier list. He was awful in this game. His stats got insanely padded at the end. He got like a rushing touchdown, like an extra like 50 yards receiving, or not receiving, my bad, passing at like the very end of the game. He was horrific. We'll get to Te'amu's performance in the championship game in the next point, but for how great that one was, this was one of the weakest QB performances of the entire season. There were a couple plays where people even tried to kind of gaslight themselves into believing it wasn't bad on Duggan. Like there was one throw he had over the middle to a guy that didn't come down with it, though it hit both of his hands. But people forget to mention that that receiver had to jump fully in the air and reach above his head to barely get it in his hands. And remember, he was wide open. That wasn't really on the receiver as much. It was a bad throw by Duggan. Duggan looked terrible in this game. Silvers came in for 2 drives and then got hurt. But in those couple of drives he was in, he looked so much better. He was completing like 60% of his passes for solid yardage. He was making good, accurate decisions, good throws. His passer rating was actually the highest in the game overall. And it's safe to say there is a real shot that if Silvers played the whole game, they could have won this one. Or at least kept it really close. But he didn't. Him getting hurt and the fact that he did show that Duggan really was holding this offense back looked bad for the coaching staff. Because remember, the whole point of them getting rid of A.J. McCarron was to have a dual threat quarterback. And it's pretty clear they should have had a pocket passer this whole time. The defenders really didn't even have to do anything. Their ground game was incredible. Deion Jackson and Abram Smith both had two of their best games all season. Te'amu had a very solid game, but overall wasn't even like the fourth most important player in DC in this game because he didn't have to be. This was a rough game. Wasn't an F tier, but it was definitely a D tier game. I don't think this was as bad as the championship game last year or one of those Stallions Breakers ones, but it is like the other one. It was a one-sided game, but there was that little hope of Silvers. Those couple of drives definitely made this game a bit higher because it did show that there was potential in this game, whereas Duggan was just really rough. So I think that D tier is a very solid place for this game. It just wasn't a good one. It was a pretty poor one. A lot of that was St. Louis, them blowing yet another game at home. And by blowing, I don't mean like blowing the lead, but just getting crushed at home again in a must-win game is really insane. I mean, it's a whole talking point the Battlehawks fans are going to have in the offseason. It's their third straight year, essentially, if you count the Dragons Week 9 game, where in a do-or-die must-win game at home, they got crushed. Not great. This game, D tier. Finally, we have the UFL championship game between the DC Defenders and the Michigan Panthers. Final score was 58-34. Just that final score alone means it's going to be at minimum B tier. You're talking about damn near 100 points scored. That's insane. Now, the game itself, Jordan Ta'amu put up the greatest performance quarterback has put up in this era of spring football. I know a couple of the Magoo playoff games and that one random Case Cookers game in like 2022 were insanely good. Ta'amu was 21-28 for 390, 4 TDs, 0 interceptions. He damn near had a perfect passer rating, and he did at points in this game. It was insane. The things that he was messing up during the regular season, right? Throwing horrible interceptions on Mallard throws, whiffing his deep ball by like 10 yards one way or the other. He wasn't doing that. He was throwing pure, accurate, perfect passes every single deep throw, and it was a huge reason why they ended up winning the way they did. I mean, they put up like 30 points in one quarter alone, which is insane. Hell, Bryce Perkins still had a great performance. He had what was, you could argue, was the second best performance a quarterback had this postseason. 21-35, 338 yards for 4 TDs and 1 interception. That's a pretty damn good stat line right there. It's not as good as Ta'amu, but it's still insanely good. And it just sucks that, in a battle of two great quarterbacks, Perkins had to lose. The thing is, we saw the 4th and 12 come into full action here. Michigan got it back-to-back times and was able to score a lot of points in that fourth quarter to make it somewhat a game. Though, obviously, they had to do it so many times that even though they got it twice, it was clear that it wasn't going to be enough to do it. And in the end, DC was able to win. Again, DC's ground game was a lot better than expected, mainly Abram Smith. Abram Smith had probably his best game the entire season in the championship game. That's despite Deion Jackson with a couple of rushing touchdowns, because Deion Jackson actually ended up being like the Deion Jackson in the regular season, where he gave you his one really solid yard or run where he gave you like a 17-yard rush. But then if you eliminate that one, he averaged like less than 3 yards a carry. So overall, he really wasn't that good in this game and in the ground, but Abram Smith was. Abram Smith actually gave you a really good game for the first time really all season, and that was another big reason why they were able to pull it off. Chris Rowland did a lot of rush plays as well at the wide receiver position, and he also had a very solid performance, even though he also had one really long rush. It was a great game. Yes, there's going to be questions, about injuries. At the end of the day, when we're talking about a championship game like this, sometimes it is a battle of attrition, right? Michigan was the more injured team. Matt Colburn was out for this game. Frank Gindna obviously has been out. They lost Kenny H. Lovely in the previous game. It is what it is. They still could have won, but they couldn't because DC just outplayed them and won the game. Of course, you had the random Gunnar Oaks strip fumble on his own teammate, which was insane to watch. Overall, though, where this goes on the tier list, it's a tough one to rank because this game never really was that close after the second quarter. Hell, even halfway through the second quarter, it wasn't that close. But the Michigan hope at the end and the fact there were so many big plays and the performance of Ta'amu, I think this has to be an A-tier game. Again, it's nowhere near S-tier. I would argue that this is probably third in the A tier. Just, again, I don't view that tier list. If you're doing a tier list, you shouldn't be ranking in the tier list. That defeats the purpose of a tier list. But I would say this is probably the weakest A tier game. I'd say this is the 5th best playoff game. Just because the other ones were close games, whereas this one wasn't really close. It's more so A tier because of some of the optics, the insane points, the Ta'amu performance. It was great. The weakest A tier game for sure. This could easily be justifiable as a B tier game. But when you have 92 points scored, I mean, come on, you got to give it some credit. So goes the A tier. But overall, that is it for this video. This has been ZomFox. Let me know down below what your tier list is. Do you agree with where I placed these ones and the previous year ones? There's a couple I was thinking about moving, but I kind of stand by pretty much all of them. Overall, though, this playoff was much better than last year. Yes, we still had one, kind of stinker, but last year's postseason was really rough compared to this one, as you had every single game basically being over by halftime. Whereas this time, it was legitimately, you had 2 great games and then only one downer. Really solid postseason. But overall, that'll do it. As always, guys, have a great night.